see that. Next up, we have the wonderful Alamo City, San Antonio.
Thank you, Kelly. Good morning, everybody. Let me get this working right, and then we can start talking. Okay, San Antonio, where do we start? I've been impressed greatly by what I've heard so far this morning. The cities of Texas are really in the front line of a lot of different planning initiatives, and you've seen from my bio, I've been all over the country and taught in all these places, and everything I learned about Texas, I'm always sort of surprised and then amazed and really impressed, because the rest of the country, frankly, doesn't know that much about it. It's very bi-coastal, and finding out what's happening in Texas is a revelation, and it should be a real guide to a lot of places across the country. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about San Antonio. We are doing things in San Antonio that needed to be done for a long time. San Antonio does not have a reputation for planning. I know, because I've been trying to find 2 assistant directors for the last 6 months and haven't found any yet. Nobody's applying from Texas or other places because I don't think there's a real culture of planning in South Texas. And maybe some of that's lapped over into Houston, but I hear there's good planning going on in Houston. So what are we trying to do to catch up in San Antonio? Well, that's what I want to talk about today. Our 2040 Initiative Comprehensive Plan, we've started out just this year. We're going to be updating some master plan policies, but really the last plan for San Antonio was adopted in 1978, over 35 years ago. And also the last time there was a real review of transportation policy was 1978. So the overall policies driving the city are pretty old, and so we really need to update that. I was wondering when I came to work in San Antonio about 3 years ago why that was. And a couple of facts sort of surprised to me that maybe there's some reason for it. One is that San Antonio hasn't increased its tax rate in 22 years. They've not had a tax rate, but provided billions of dollars of new development. Why is that? Just the growth. What's generating all that growth? Well, we had 31 million visitors last year. People love San Antonio. They like to live there. They like to come visit. They like to work there. That generates a lot of income, but doesn't generate plans. People, there's a momentum there of growth and development, and stepping back and figuring out, well, where are we going to go is just not something people do when they're all really tied up in this whole process of growth and development and building and just providing a good place to live for people. So I came on to take a look at what we have to do for planning in San Antonio, and here's a map. The map shows in yellow there the city limits, and that's in yellow. It's almost 500 square miles. In green there is the ETJ, extraterritorial jurisdiction, that we do planning for, which is another 600 square miles. So we're doing planning for about 1,100 square miles in and around San Antonio. And this is an area that is super rapidly growing. I mean, the city of San Antonio, about 90,000 growth, between the last 2 censuses, and going to about 30,000 a year right now. But when you look at everything on that map, that's grown by about 50,000 people a year. And there is no plan, and there is no zoning in all that green area. And right now there's almost 500,000 people in that green area with no urban services. So that's a big challenge for those people and for San Antonio, where all that growth is impacting the city, and we have not really much control or no say at all in what happens there. So we're looking at 1.1 million additional people coming to Bexar County alone in the next 25 years, and 500,000 new jobs and housing units. And so what we've decided to do is to try to get a handle on all this growth is to first of all start out, well, where's their capacity for growth? How much demand is there going to be in pretty discrete units? How are we going to look at infill development, and what would be the cost of accommodating as much of that growth as possible in infill development in the city's existing footprint? And what's left over will have to go outside, they'll have to annex. And we had no answers to any of these questions. So we've hired a couple good consulting firms, EPS out of Denver, Fraganese out of Portland, and we've got a couple of MIG out of Berkeley, mostly West Coast people, that come in and help us to answer some of these questions, to get a framework on how we should go, how we should grow in the future. Because we do have some overall vision for the city. The 2020 program that Mayor Julian Castro fostered a few years ago, really defined the future of San Antonio, wanting to be a great world-class city, wanting to be a city exemplified with smart growth and really vibrant neighborhoods and building on the environmental quality of the area and this very deep and old culture, and not lose any of that in the face of this rapid growth. And how do you do that? Well, it was pretty well defined on what wanted to be done, what the city wanted, but how to get there, what was the blueprint, there wasn't really a clue. So my job, give us the clue. What's the guideline? What's the roadmap? And so that's what the comprehensive plan is designed to do. We are embarking on a comprehensive plan that will provide the answers for that in terms of the capacity for growth and infill, the barriers to growth, the demand for growth in activity centers in the different parts of the city, how to align those things, and what the fiscal impact of those different kinds of growth would be, and where we have to put emphasis for infrastructure to make a lot of that growth go into the growth centers, both the existing ones and the new ones. So to do that, we started out with a comprehensive plan concept, pretty traditional, looking at housing elements and looking at transportation, public safety, etc. But then it morphed into, well, we really need to step back further. We really need to do a sustainability plan, which goes into air quality. It goes into a lot of other components that aren't usually covered by land use plans. And we really need to do a strategic multimodal transportation plan that begins to link up all these growth centers and looks at other modes of transportation. There is no good rapid transit system in San Antonio. It's the biggest bus system in the country, but that's not the big solution. One new BRT line just opened up, but there's no rail at all, period. All the roads are nearing capacity, and interchanges are being built at $500 million each, which is pretty ridiculous. So there must be a better alternative to all that. So we're looking at all that too, and then underlying all that is a big question mark about the basic resource that every city has to have. You know what that is? It's water. Will we have enough water in the face of climate change, in the face of drought, in the face of the aquifers in the south side of Texas, and the rivers drying up, and all that for the future? And if we don't, what are we going to do to get it? So we're looking at all those plans at once, which is, I think, probably more than most places have decided to take a bite of. A comprehensive plan, a multimodal transportation plan, a sustainability plan, a water plan, a housing element, and all of those being done in an 18-month period. So how are we going to do that? This is a big planning challenge for planners in the audience. Well, we hired these consultants. I told you about them working on our MIG group that are going to be doing the basic framework for the comprehensive plan, the policy review. We've got 500 policies. Of course, they're inconsistent with each other and out of date. Hard to follow those. Existing conditions, our policy papers on major areas like public health and safety, park recreation services and all that. A big, huge public engagement program. People in San Antonio don't even know the questions to ask. Must understand the answers when they answer questions about planning. So we are allocating nearly $500,000 for a big public engagement program to really get out there and explain, educate on every type of media possible. Urban design illustrations, 3D, 2D, whatever D we can to explain what it's all going to look like. How will new communities function? How do you integrate the entire population of Metro Austin into San Antonio? We're talking about look like, how will it function? How should it be? Where will it go in businesses go in relation to everything else? So, initial 500,000 jobs. All these questions require some kind of illustrative answer because people don't know, they can't conceive of it without some help. So that's a huge portion of this program too. And then writing all this up in a way that's understandable, without jargon, that's not written for planners, but written for people, that institutions, organizations, school districts, hospitals, PTAs, whomever, that need to use a plan to guide the future. So basically, we've started from scratch here. We didn't even have an organizational structure at all. There is no planning constituency in South Texas organization of people. The MPO doesn't even have a planning committee. There is no APA. We have an APA chapter like this one, but basically we can meet in a room about a third of the size and talk over lunch. That's about it. So there is no real constituency. The city council didn't have a committee on planning. There's no kind of organizational framing for any of this, so we have to create all that from scratch. So this is like going back to a small town and trying to create a planning program, not a city of almost 2 million people. But we have to do it. So we set up a tri-chair committee with city council people, CEOs of big corporations, big names at the university and environment. We're going to have a lot of different organizational structures, 13 committees so far. We're organizing to address all of these different subject matter areas in terms of growth in urban form, transportation, housing, green and healthy neighborhoods, public facilities and safety, historic preservation. The military, there's 200,000 military in San Antonio, a big chunk of the population. Natural resources, the environment, jobs, economics, and changing the codes, and overall underlying sustainability. We're going to have working groups working in all these areas with subject matter experts taken from all the different companies, corporations, interest groups, nonprofits in the city. The mayor sent out a letter last week inviting 49 different institutions to join an advisory group and send people and send plans. What they're doing, what they want to do, and who they want to be engaged in this program so that we have some real technical depth as well as breadth in the community to engage this program. And they'll be populating these working groups, and then from those working groups, their chairs will be forming our steering committee, headed up by those tri-chairs, and then our consultants, together with the Citizen Planning Institute, we're going to be organizing with a curriculum to train people like Planning 101, Transportation 101, Public Finance 101, so that we can be able to engage the public as we move on with this. And all that you see in this program feeding up there to the new comprehensive planning committee of council, which they've taken on as a primary responsibility to be sure the public's engaged in all this, and finally getting back to city council for final approval. Planning commissioners are involved here. We've got a whole structure of people, organizations, institutions, and subject matter experts coming together to address these long-range planning issues in all these different categories. Never done before in San Antonio. So the biggest piece of all that, this is a $3 million, what I just explained to you costs about $1 million we've got budgeted. This is another $3 million to do the transportation component of this. And this is to look at a city that has a big bus system and lots of roads and nothing else, but like 100 trains a day that goes through that sort of disrupt everything. So how do you organize all that in the face of all this huge growth that's coming at us? So we know about Texas and the population growth there, and our Texas Triangle, San Antonio, Austin, Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, we're all here. This is where the action is. This is the most prosperous part of the U.S. right now, probably the most prosperous part of the world, most rapidly growing, and we are here with responsibility to make that growth happen in a way that's sustainable, good, always for all of our citizens and a whole lot of new citizens that are going to be coming. So how are we going to deal with that in San Antonio? Well, we're looking at how do you accommodate these million new residents on all these jobs and housing units in a way that works. It's functional, it's walkable, it's livable, that responds to all those demographics we've been talking about, the millennials and the boomers. And in San Antonio, the underclass, we have over 250,000 people who don't have a high school education, and we are just reeling from all the changes that are going on. How do we get them engaged in the whole community and its economy? So we are trying to put some rationality to this. We do at least have a 2040 metropolitan transportation plan that we've been involved in that's about ready to be adopted that looks at this, well, just for San Antonio, the million addition, but another 500,000 people for the suburban counties, adding this 1.5 million people to the 2.5 million people there now. So we're talking about planning for 4 million people in the greater San Antonio area. We are looking at a timeline here for the plan to get all done by spring 2016. So we have a pretty big roller coaster ride ahead of us. And we're all up in the upswing right now, but pretty quick it's going to go the down, the gravity, real fast. We're also working on the sustainability plan to look at our air and water quality and community health, resilience, and social equity issues. Not only is water a big issue in San Antonio, but air is too. We're the largest non-attainment city in the country, and we're just on the edge of tipping over into non-attainment, which has huge consequences for economic development, for local costs and transportation. We're trying to blow the air back from the shale, but Eagle Shale, which keeps blowing up, and our sensors are getting those. So there's not a lot we can do. We have to plan for that. Social equity and resiliency in large underclasses is a huge challenge for San Antonio, as it is for Dallas. And it's growing. We probably recorded illegals in the city easily from Mexico, and how they integrate or don't with the economy is a big challenge. The sustainability plan will look at the community of municipal operations, not just these air and water issues, but how we can operate the city more effectively. A big city like San Antonio has got almost a $3 billion budget. It's a major corporation, and it affects a lot of the local economy. Indicators we're going to be used be based on the 2020 vision that we have, but we're going to try to really use some national standards and localize them to San Antonio. And then last but not least, and that's interesting, that's out of focus. Well, okay. We are looking at all that big 500, 600 square mile area outside the city limits to annex. Because, first of all, they need urban services. Secondly, all that population is impacting existing city services, streets and roads and parks, etc., libraries. We need to really look at areas that make sense for growth. We do not want to have those areas be competitive. Particularly, we do not want to become like Dallas, and not in a bad way. We just don't want to be surrounded by 130 other cities. And we could easily be surrounded by 130 other cities if we let all that land incorporate into 600 square miles of suburbs. So we have to do some preemptive specific assessments there. And I'm sorry for the slides that when I copy it didn't look like this, but these are sort of out of focus, but at least you can see some things there. We did a big study. We called this a 360 annexation study. We adopted the council adopted a policy last year to look at annexation of all the ETJ, and we found 50 have a right plan for annexation with about 250,000 people in it. And we went back and we gave that presentation, and they said, well, prioritize. So we've come back now with some specific recommendations, and these are right now going to be before council on December 4th to annex about 65 square miles at limited purpose over the next 2 years. The current population of about 125,000. By 2020, when these become full purpose, it'd be about 200,000 people just in those increments, in 5 different areas. They are the northeast portion of the city here on I-10, going out toward Houston there. That purple is, that's partly, almost all developed now, but it's not in any urban services, and they have a lot of social problems there, crime problems, and it needs to be really managed because it's impacting the city around it. So that's sort of a preemptive approach there. On the north side, that blue area is north of the area called Stone Oak, real rapidly growing on Highway 281. It's going to be expanded to managed lanes and half a dozen new interchanges, about $400 million worth of investment over the next couple of years. No zoning there, so you can imagine what's going to happen without zoning unless we bring zoning in. And so we are going to bring zoning in there with the annexation. That pink area to the northwest is the I-10 corridor going out to the town of Bernie, and that area too is high-income, rapid growth. And I-10 to manage lanes and maybe toll lanes and widenings with interchanges, and the land rush is on their way up there. The yellow part on the west side is the fastest growing area of the metropolitan region, and that's called Animal Ranch. It's growing by about 5,000 people a year, I guess, and lots of new upper middle class subdivisions there. And then the orange area down by Lakeland Air Force Base. That's one of the major bases that are concerned about mission impact, new growth adjacent that could really compromise their mission. So they have different reasons altogether to annex these different areas, but together they provide a big program. We'll know by Christmas whether this will be a big project next year or not. And you can't read that. So, moving on, this says we're going to get it done quickly. That was the annexation program to get all that back to council in most of those areas within a year. And then it takes 3 years for limited purpose annexation to become effective. We do a lot of detailed studies, a lot of notices, a lot of meetings, as you can imagine. And then around 2019, they'd be coming back for refined boundaries and full permanent annexation by the city. If that happens and all that's annexed, and we're looking at a 2020 city population of about 1.5 million from 1.3 million in the 2010 census. So it's all about outside. Here inside, we also have a program we started up to renew the city called USA. And trying to get our inner city neighborhoods up and going. The idea here is to reinvest in neighborhoods, to revitalize commercial corridors, to rehabilitate houses, to restore historic structures, to remove blighting structures, and regreen the city that's been passed over. So we're redoing everything, so hence the we're trying to do a kind of market assessment work here too, a little different from what Dallas is doing. We're looking more at the market value approach, where we've divided looking at the city in terms of its infrastructure, its street grid, its urban form, its market character, different kinds of product types for the different kinds of housing, retail, office markets, and trying to look at all the 900 block groups and divide the city up into different market segments from the developer perspective, not so much the consumer perspective. That's the difference between what we're doing. We're using the same consultant, though, if I can easy. So they're good, that's for sure. So we've done this kind of analysis. We've also got that's going forward, and we're trying now look at that and come up with where we want to focus our redevelopment potential. What we have done currently, that's sort of prospective, this is retrospectively, we did an analysis of those same 900 block groups a couple years ago to find out what was the worst areas of the city that needed revitalization, both from economics, demographics, social equity, and physical issues. And that's all those areas shown here in the dark color. Those are all block groups in the center of the city. The loop there is the 410 loop, and so mostly focused on east-west corridor coming out of the downtown. In red there, you might just notice some of those things are what we have taken from those is 5 targeted neighborhoods. We're working with HUD and with the local communities, chodos, and nonprofits to redevelop those 5 targeted neighborhoods as key priorities for all of our federal programs. We get about $20 million in federal CBG and home funds a year, and they're targeting about 80% of them in those areas to see if we can really make a difference in terms of the parks and infrastructure improvements, housing rehab, repair, single-family, multifamily in those targeted neighborhoods. We're going to be using that new demographic market value studies to refine this and expand these to other areas next year and the year after. So that, in summary, is a lot of things that we're doing. Just other things we didn't get a chance to put on here. We have recently gotten from HUD designation as a promise zone on that one area on the east side. We also have a choice neighborhood grant to revitalize an inner city neighborhood called Wheatley, tear down an old housing project, replace it with mixed use, mixed income development. And there's a promised neighborhood from the Department of Education to renew all the schools in that same neighborhood. This is a big White House initiative. They're really interested in the White House Policy Council here about how, if you throw all programs, as many as possible, into a small area as possible, what's going to happen. So our east side of San Antonio is that area, so it's very interesting. We have to report out on 200 indicators back to HUD on what's happening over the next couple of years. Our mayor became secretary of HUD partly because of this big engagement process that we have there, and our Housing Authority chair is now, I think, going to be deputy secretary of HUD for housing for the whole U.S. So things happen in San Antonio, people notice, and we are becoming somewhat of a model in terms of that area to do with redevelopment. We hope we will be in the future for new development. I look at envy at all these mixed-use villages and multiple developments and walkable neighborhoods and transit lines in all the other cities, big cities of Texas. Hope we will get those to San Antonio soon, but we have a big job. Our council just sort of put back $80 million in money for a streetcar because there wasn't public support for it. They did not know why or where we needed to build a streetcar. Well, when we do our new downtown plan, the new comprehensive plan, multimodal plan, we'll tell them why and where and how it's going to be paid for. But nobody could answer those questions last year, but next year we hope to. So be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
John, I'm curious, as cities, as San Antonio and other cities do transportation planning, do you expect that TxDOT in the future will be providing the same level of support that they do now, or now that they're going to be getting more funding with this constitutional amendment, is there going to be more support from TxDOT for?
Well, we hope so. I think certainly there's a movement nationally, internationally, of course, for high-speed rail, for commuter rail, for local light rail, streetcars, and I think certainly the Texas transportation professionals see that. And as been said earlier today, some cities, we're here there too, have reached capacity on these roads. I mean, we can add a couple more $1 billion to roads in San Antonio, but we just costed out in the 2040 unconstrained MPO plan $20 billion just to get to the level of congestion management we were 10 years ago, given the growth. That's just like throwing money after, at nothing. So there has to be a shift to mode. What we have to do is explain that to the public, that you just can't keep building capacity which gets filled up. It's like, throwing water onto sand. It's just going to seep into everything. You have to change the mode. You have to change the way cities are structured, the way that they're organized. And then there could be a difference. And put houses close to jobs, jobs close to housing, change the densities, all those types of things which have been anathema sort of for planners for decades. We have to change that whole mindset and not just focus on cars to get everywhere. The more we can explain that to legislators, to the public, the sooner it's going to happen in terms of policy and funding at the state level.
I have a quick question. We heard today that the U.S. Army was going to be closing a brigade combat team in Fort Campbell because of some of the sequestration that was done last year. How are y'all planning for that in San Antonio because of your heavy reliance on the military?
Well, San Antonio has been the net receiver of almost all the BRAC Commission closures. The people that are closed out and moved end up in San Antonio. So we've been the real beneficiary from all that. A $2 billion major medical center in the last 5 years. Tens of thousands of new military transferred into the city, into the 5 bases. And right now, part of our plan here is a joint JLIS and a joint military plan with all of those military groups in San Antonio. So we did have a couple of base closures, and one was Brooks Base and one was what we now call Port San Antonio, Kelly Air Force Base. Those are now turned into mixed-use new developments, industrial and mixed-use areas with their own tax increment financing districts and development potential. So that's how we've been looking at those as opportunities for redevelopment at a much better repurposed kind of structure than was there before.
John, we've gone from a very aggressive annexation policy in Fort Worth, not quite as aggressive as you're proposing, not nearly. And I'm just curious what the public response and the political response is in San Antonio to that level of annexation, both inside the city and in the areas that you're annexing.
Well, we've been all over 360 degrees on that. We did sort of a trial run last year. We annexed 19 square miles out of a 30 square mile proposal we made on the south side. But we only annexed 3,000 people. But we ended up feeling like we talked to 3,000 people. So everybody was concerned. But the businesses liked it. We annexed all the shale potential land and for businesses. And they liked the new urban service levels that was going to come to them, public safety, fire, police. So that part they liked. They weren't zoned already now, and so some of them really liked the fact that they were going to have some zoning protections, some public health, and code enforcement that had never been there in history. So all of those things are new service levels that the annexed areas get. Of course, the people that are paying a lot of money in expensive subdivisions for HOAs, or for PIDs and MUDs and those types of things, all those districts, they're not sure if it's good for them, because the city property taxes basically adds up to about 25% increase in their overall tax payments. So they have to be convinced that they're going to get new services that will at least pay for, at least for a while, that increased annual cost to them. So it's a range of things. There's different reasons why people are being annexed or not. Others are concerned about environmental situations. We had a case recently with the Bracken Cave. Maybe you heard about that, where the largest concentration of mammals in the world live in Bexar County. Bats. 100 million bats live in this cave, and a developer wanted to put 3,000 houses in jail. And the county, no zoning, sure, why not? Nothing could say no. Well, the city helped foundations buy the property and preserve it, conserve it, but we're afraid about that happening. Our aquifer, we drink all the water from, it's getting completely covered with houses, and it's not under the city control. So there's some major environmental issues for annexing it all. And we don't want all those competing cities to pop up, Woods and Wildwoods and the Hilldales and every place that we can help it. We need all that to be in San Antonio.